There's a specific kind of dread that shows up about 4 hours before someone is supposed to come to your house. It isn't the dread of seeing them. You might actually like this person. You might have been looking forward to it all week, right up until the moment you looked around your living room and felt something in your chest tighten. I've noticed this in a lot of people over the years, and for a long time I assumed it was about the mess. The dishes, the clutter on the table that's been there since Tuesday. But then I started talking to people who have spotless homes, homes you could photograph for a magazine, and they described the exact same feeling, the tightness, the low hum of "I need everyone to leave before they even arrive." So it isn't the house, something else is happening. There's a man I'll call Daniel. Daniel is generous, almost to a fault. He'll drive across town to help a friend move. He remembers birthdays. He'll sit on the phone for an hour if someone's having a hard week. But the idea of that same friend dropping by his apartment unannounced makes his stomach drop in a way he's never been able to explain, not even to himself. You might know a Daniel. You might, in certain rooms of your life, be one. And here's the question that doesn't have an answer yet. If these are warm, connected, caring people, why does the most ordinary form of closeness, someone sitting on their couch, feel like a threat? We tend to assume that not wanting people over is a withdrawal, a coldness, maybe even a flaw in someone's capacity to connect. But almost every person I've talked to who feels this way is, underneath it, deeply attuned to other people. They notice things. They pick up on a shift in tone, a flicker of judgment crossing someone's face, the half-second pause before a compliment that might actually be a critique. This sensitivity is usually a strength. It's why they're often the friend people go to when they need to be truly heard. The cost of that strength is that their own home stops being neutral ground. It becomes another surface to be read. Every object in it becomes a sentence someone else might silently translate. The throw pillow that doesn't match, the smell of the kitchen, the fact that the guest bathroom doesn't have hand towels, just a roll of paper towels shoved behind the sink. None of this matters to most people who walk through that door, but to the person who lives there, every detail is a possible verdict waiting to be read on a guest's face. I keep coming back to this thought. Maybe the most hospitable instincts and the most anxious ones come from the exact same root. The same nervous system that makes someone deeply considerate of how others feel is the one that can't stop imagining how others will judge. Which raises a stranger question. If this isn't a personality trait, if it isn't something you simply are, then it had to start somewhere. So when did the home stop being a private place and start being a stage? Nobody decides this. That's the part that gets missed. For some people, it's wired in early, a nervous system that runs a little hotter, that registers the presence of another person, especially in a personal space, as something requiring vigilance rather than ease, not a flaw.
Just a setting, like a smoke detector calibrated to go off at the faintest whiff of smoke instead of waiting for flames. For others, it was built. A childhood where the house wasn't a refuge, but a performance venue. Maybe a parent who cleaned frantically before company came, whose mood shifted the moment the doorbell rang. Maybe a home where mess meant shame, and shame meant punishment. So the lesson became, people seeing your space is people seeing your worth. Or maybe it was smaller than that. A single afternoon. A friend who came over once and made one comment. "Wow, your house is so small," or "Is this all you have?" Said carelessly, maybe even as a joke, but landing somewhere permanent. A single data point the brain decided to treat as a rule. And sometimes it isn't even about the house at all, not at first. Sometimes it's about exposure itself. A person who grew up having to perform at the dinner table, in front of relatives, in front of a parent's friends, smiling on command, answering questions correctly, learns early that being looked at is a kind of work. The home, later in life, simply becomes the next stage that performance moves to. The furniture changes. The underlying job, be acceptable while being watched, stays exactly the same. Here's the strange part. Your brain didn't wait for your permission to write that rule. It was already drafting the instructions long before you ever noticed you were following them. What this means is that nobody is born flinching at the sound of a doorbell. Something taught the body that connection in this particular space comes with a price, and the body, trying to protect you, started charging that price in advance every single time. If that's true, where else has this been quietly running, underneath things you never thought to question? It shows up in places that look, on the surface, completely unrelated to hospitality. There's the overcleaning. Not regular tidying, but a specific, almost ritualistic deep clean that happens only before guests, scrubbing baseboards that haven't been touched in months, as if the house itself is being prepared for inspection rather than for a friend to sit down and have a glass of wine. There's the over-explaining. The guest walks in, and before they can even say hello, they're hearing, "Sorry, it's such a mess," when it isn't, or "We haven't had time to really set this room up," about a room that's perfectly fine. You might recognize this in yourself, the apology that arrives before anyone has said anything critical at all, as if getting ahead of the judgment somehow softens it. There's the relief that comes the second the door closes behind them. Not relief that the visit is over because it was unpleasant. Often the visit was lovely. But relief in the body, a kind of exhale, like coming down off something. Daniel describes it as feeling like he can finally breathe out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding for 3 hours. And there's the quieter pattern, the one that's easy to miss, choosing to meet people anywhere else. The coffee shop, the restaurant, their place, never yours. Always with a reason that sounds practical. It's just easier, the parking's better there. But underneath the reason is a rule operating on its own, one that's never been said out loud. Keep them out of the one place where you can't control what they see. There's the preemptive narration too, the running commentary that starts before a guest even sits down. "Don't look in the closet, it's a disaster in there." I know, I still haven't hung anything on that wall." It sounds like self-deprecating humor. Most people laugh along and think nothing of it. But notice what it's actually doing. It's grabbing the judgment before it can land on its own terms, narrating the flaw first so that no one else gets to discover it. If you point it out yourself, somehow it hurts less than if someone else does. There's the scheduling around it too. A person might say yes to a visit 2 weeks out and feel completely fine about it in the moment. But watch what happens as the date gets closer. The closer it gets, the more the apartment starts to look wrong.
Furniture that seemed fine for years suddenly looks dated. A stain on the carpet that's been there since they moved in suddenly feels urgent, something that has to be dealt with tonight. The deadline doesn't just create cleaning, it creates a kind of temporary blindness to how things looked yesterday, replaced with a hyper-awareness of how they'll look through someone else's eyes tomorrow. And there's one more, maybe the most telling. The selective invitation. Some friends get invited over easily, without much thought. Others somehow never quite make it onto the guest list, and the person doing the inviting can't always say why. Often, without realizing it, the line gets drawn around perceived status. The friend who has a beautiful home of their own, the coworker who seems put together, the relative who's a little too sharp-eyed, they're the ones who keep getting met at restaurants instead. The pattern reveals something quietly. This isn't really about the house at all. It's about who feels safe enough to witness it. None of these look like fear from the outside. They look like preferences, quirks. "Oh, I'm just a private person." But you start to notice they're all doing the same job. They're all protecting the same thing. Here's what makes this more than a quirky habit. It doesn't stay still. It grows. Each time someone successfully avoids having guests over and nothing bad happens, the brain doesn't relax. It does the opposite. It quietly logs a connection. Avoiding that was the right move. The relief reinforces the avoidance, and the avoidance reinforces the belief that the home genuinely is too risky to share. Over time, the radius shrinks. First, it's only close family allowed in. Then, it's only the people who've already seen the house 100 times. Then, there's a flicker of discomfort even with them, because what if today's the day they notice something they hadn't noticed before? There's a particular irony hiding inside this loop that's worth sitting with.
The more successfully someone avoids exposure, the more fragile the whole structure becomes, not less. A person who lets 100 different friends see their ordinary, unstaged life builds 100 small proofs that they're fine just as they are. A person who avoids that exposure never collects that evidence. So instead of becoming more confident over time, they become more convinced that the only reason things have stayed okay is the avoidance itself. The fear doesn't shrink, it just gets a longer and longer track record of successes to point to, each one actually starving it of the one thing that could prove it wrong. The home, which should be the one place where a person gets to fully exhale, starts to feel less like a refuge and more like a vault, something to protect rather than something to live in freely. And the toll isn't just about hosting. It bleeds into friendships that quietly thin out because people stop asking, having been told no enough times. It bleeds into relationships where a partner might feel a low ache of, "Why don't you want to show me where you live?" It can bleed into someone's relationship with themselves too, a creeping sense that their own home, the place that's supposed to reflect who they are, has become evidence to be hidden rather than a life to be shared. It can even bleed into how someone thinks about their own future. Some people quietly downsize their ambitions around hosting milestones, holidays, gatherings, the kind of moments other people build whole traditions around, simply because the thought of their space being the backdrop feels unbearable. They tell themselves they just don't care about that sort of thing. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's the fear, wearing the costume of a preference, making a decision on their behalf without ever asking permission. But here's the thing that gives me hope every time I think about this. The same mechanism that built the wall is not fixed in place. A learned response is, by definition, something that can be unlearned. The question isn't how to force yourself to stop caring what people think. Maybe the real shift is this. It's not that you need to fix yourself before people can come over. Maybe the people who matter were never coming over to grade you in the first place. There's no 5-step plan for this. Anyone who tells you there is hasn't actually sat with how it feels. But there is a different way to hold it.
Instead of asking, how do I make my home good enough to be seen, a person might start asking, what would it feel like to let someone see it as it actually is, today, mess and all, and survive that? That single shift from performance to presence changes the entire texture of the moment. It means the goal of having someone over isn't to impress them, it's just to be with them. The dishes in the sink stop being evidence and start being just dishes, the ordinary residue of an ordinary life that happens to have people in it. Some people start small, not a dinner party, just one friend for 20 minutes, with the house exactly as it is. No deep clean, no apology at the door. Just the radical, quietly terrifying experiment of letting someone in and watching, almost like a scientist, what actually happens. Most of the time, what happens is nothing. The friend sits down, the friend talks about their day, the friend doesn't even glance at the thing you were so sure they'd notice. And each time that happens, the nervous system gets a new piece of evidence to work with. Not a lecture, not a mantra, just a lived experience that contradicts the old rule. Slowly, the body starts updating what it believes is true. There's another piece to this, one that has less to do with the guests and more to do with what the host says to themselves in the minutes before the doorbell rings. Instead of the old script, "I need to fix this before anyone sees," a new sentence starts to take its place. "This is what my life looks like right now, and that's allowed." It sounds almost too simple to matter, but the body responds to that sentence differently than it responds to scrambling around with a vacuum at the last minute. One is a kind of bracing, the other is a kind of settling. It also helps to notice, out loud if possible, the difference between a host size and a critic size. Most people who walk through that door aren't running an inspection. They're looking for a place to sit and a person to talk to. The rare person who does walk in and comment on the state of the bookshelf is usually saying more about themselves than about you, And that too is worth remembering the next time the old alarm goes off. This isn't about becoming someone who loves hosting parties every weekend. Some people will always prefer smaller gatherings, quieter visits, more notice before someone comes by. That's not a problem to solve. The problem was never the preference for privacy. The problem was the fear hiding underneath it, the fear that made privacy feel mandatory instead of chosen. Think back to that moment at the start, the tightening in the chest 4 hours before someone's due to arrive. What if that feeling isn't a warning that something's wrong with you? What if it's just an old alarm installed a long time ago by someone or something that meant well, still ringing for a danger that in this room, with this person, on this particular afternoon, doesn't actually exist anymore? Daniel still feels a flicker of it sometimes, that old tightness, when a friend says they're stopping by. But he started noticing the flicker instead of obeying it. He started letting people see the version of his home that exists on a Tuesday, not the version that exists after 3 hours of frantic preparation. And what he's found, slowly, is that the people worth having in his life were never the ones counting throw pillows. Maybe that's the quiet truth underneath all of this. A home doesn't have to be impressive to be worth opening. It just has to be yours. And the people who were actually meant to be in your life were never going to leave because your guest towels don't match. So here's something worth sitting with after this video ends. When's the last time you let someone see your space exactly as it was? No preparation, no performance. And what would it feel like to do that again on purpose this week? I'd genuinely like to know what comes up for you. If this is something you recognize in yourself or in someone you love, tell me about it in the comments. Sometimes just naming the pattern out loud is the first thing that loosens its grip. And if this is the kind of thing that resonates with you, the quiet mechanisms running underneath everyday behavior, there's another video on this channel that picks up almost exactly where this one leaves off, about why some people can't relax until everyone else in the room is okay first. It might be the next piece of this same puzzle.